Jessica was married for years, but felt completely ignored by her husband. She tried to fix things, but nothing changed. In her loneliness, she ended up getting close to 3 different men, each giving her something she was missing at home. When her husband finally found out, everything fell apart. This is her side of the story. I'm Jessica, I'm 32, and everyone keeps acting like I'm this monster, but they don't know the whole truth about what my marriage was really like before everything went down. Griffin and I were together for 8 years, married for 4, and from the outside, it probably looked perfect. Nice house in Phoenix, decent cars, the whole suburban dream thing. He had some technical job that kept him busy but paid the bills, and I did client work that gave me flexibility. People would see our Facebook posts and think we had it all figured out, but here's what nobody saw behind all those happy couple photos and dinner party smiles. Griffin had gotten so comfortable in our marriage that he basically stopped trying altogether. Like, completely stopped. He'd come home from work, barely acknowledge I existed, and just disappear into his phone or laptop for the rest of the night. I'm talking about months where our conversations consisted of, how was work, and what's for dinner. And that was it. Date nights became us sitting on the couch watching Netflix while he scrolled through his phone, not even pretending to pay attention to whatever show I'd picked. I'd try to talk to him about my day, about things that were bothering me, about anything really, and I'd get these dismissive little responses like, or that's nice, babe, without him even looking up from whatever screen was in front of him. It was like being married to someone who had completely forgotten I was a real person with thoughts and feelings and needs. The loneliness was crushing, but whenever I brought it up, he'd act like I was being dramatic or asking for too much. Our intimate life became this scheduled, predictable thing that felt more like checking a box than actually connecting with each other. He never initiated anymore, never tried to make it special or romantic, just this routine thing we did, maybe once a week if I was lucky. And when I'd hint that I needed more attention or affection, he'd get defensive and say work was stressful or that I was expecting too much from him. Meanwhile, I'm keeping track of every little thing I do for this man, making his favorite meals, remembering important dates, supporting his career stuff, managing our social calendar, and getting absolutely nothing back. The breaking point came when I realized he'd completely forgotten our wedding anniversary was coming up. Not just forgotten to plan something, but when I mentioned maybe we should do something special, he looked genuinely surprised and said, "Oh right, that's this month, isn't it?" That's when I knew for sure that I was completely alone in this marriage, even though I was sharing a bed with someone every single night. I started feeling resentful about everything. How he never helped with household stuff without being asked multiple times. How he'd make plans with his friends without checking with me first, but if I wanted to go out with my girlfriends, suddenly he had opinions about my schedule. How he'd spend money on his hobbies and gadgets without discussion, but question every purchase I made, like I needed his permission to buy clothes or get my hair done. The double standard was insane. He expected me to be available whenever he wanted attention or needed something, but couldn't be bothered to show me the same courtesy. And don't even get me started on how he'd act in front of our friends. Suddenly, he's this devoted, attentive husband, making jokes and being charming. Then the second we got in the car to go home, back to ignoring me completely. I began to feel invisible in my own house, unappreciated for everything I was doing to keep our life together, and honestly just really angry all the time. But instead of fighting about it constantly and being seen as the nagging wife, I started withdrawing too. Why should I be the only one trying to save our marriage? So there I was, feeling completely neglected and basically like a ghost in my own relationship when I met this guy at a work thing. His name was Marcus. He was probably 10 years older than me, successful. And here's the crazy part. He actually listened when I talked. Like, really listened. Not the fake nodding Griffin did while scrolling through his phone. Marcus would ask follow-up questions about my projects, remember details from conversations we'd had weeks before, and made me feel like what I had to say actually mattered for the first time in months. We ended up getting drinks after one of the conference sessions, and he was so attentive, so interested in my thoughts and opinions about everything. He made me laugh in ways I hadn't in forever. For the first time, and I don't even know how long, I felt seen and appreciated, and like someone actually enjoyed my company. When he suggested we grab dinner the next night, I said yes, without even hesitating. I told myself it was just networking, just a friendly meal between colleagues, but deep down I knew it was more than that. And honestly, I didn't care. The conversation flowed so easily, and he kept complimenting me. My intelligence, my sense of humor, how I looked. When was the last time Griffin had complimented anything about me? I genuinely couldn't remember a single time in the past year. That night, when Marcus walked me back to my hotel room, there was this moment where we both knew what was about to happen. And you know what? I didn't feel guilty at all. I felt alive for the first time in months. Here was someone who actually wanted me, who made an effort to be with me, who treated me like I was worth pursuing instead of just some obligation he had to deal with. We spent the night together, and it was everything that had been missing from my marriage. Passion, connection, genuine intimacy, where someone was actually present and engaged instead of just going through the motions. The next morning, I expected to feel horrible about what I'd done, but instead I felt energized, like I'd remembered who I was outside of being Griffin's ignored wife. When I got home, Griffin barely asked about the conference. Just a casual, "How was your trip?" While he was making coffee, not even looking at me, already back on his phone, that's when I realized he probably wouldn't have even noticed if I'd been gone for a week instead of 3 days. He was that checked out of my life. Marcus and I started texting regularly after that. Nothing too obvious at first, just friendly work stuff that gradually became more personal. He'd send me articles he thought I'd find interesting, ask about my day, remember things I'd mentioned about projects or problems I was dealing with. It was such a contrast to Griffin, who couldn't even remember that I had a big presentation coming up or that I was stressed about a difficult client situation. Those conversations with Marcus became honestly the best part of my day. He made me feel smart and funny and appreciated. All the things I used to feel about myself before my marriage became this boring routine of being taken for granted. When he suggested meeting up again during another business trip, I didn't hesitate even for a second. This time, I didn't even pretend it was just networking. I was honest with myself about what I wanted, and what I wanted was to feel desired and valued again. Griffin had made it crystal clear through his actions that I wasn't a priority in his life, so why should his feelings be my priority? If he wanted to act single by ignoring me and treating me like I was invisible, then maybe I deserved to feel what it was like to be pursued by someone who actually cared about spending time with me. Marcus never made me feel like I was asking for too much or being dramatic when I wanted attention and affection. He made me feel normal for wanting those things from someone I was close to. After a few months of seeing Marcus whenever our schedules lined up, I started feeling more confident about myself again. I'd honestly forgotten what it was like to feel attractive and desirable, and it was addictive in the best way. That's when I met Trevor at my friend Sarah's birthday party. Griffin had backed out of coming with some excuse about being tired from work, which was typical because he never wanted to do anything social anymore. So I went alone, which I was doing more and more often lately since he never wanted to go anywhere or do anything that required actual effort. Trevor was charming, funny, and about 12 years older than me with this whole sophisticated thing going that I found really appealing. He had his own business and had traveled all over the world, had all these interesting stories that made my life with Griffin seem so small and boring by comparison. While Griffin spent his free time playing video games or watching sports on the couch, here was a man who had actually lived and experienced things. Trevor was incredibly attentive throughout the evening, bringing me drinks, introducing me to people, making sure I was having a good time. It was such a change from going to events with Griffin, who would usually find a corner to stand in and check his phone half the night, making it obvious he didn't want to be there. When Trevor asked for my number, I gave it to him without thinking twice. I mean, Griffin hadn't even bothered to ask how the party was when I got home. He was already asleep on the couch with the TV still on, exactly where I'd left him hours before. Our first coffee date turned into a 3-hour conversation about travel, career goals, life experiences, all the deep talks I used to try to have with Griffin before he started responding with grunts and one-word answers. Trevor had opinions about things, ambitions, stories to tell. He made me realize how much I'd been settling for someone who had just gotten completely lazy about everything, including our relationship. When things progressed beyond coffee dates, I justified it by telling myself that Griffin had basically checked out of our marriage emotionally anyway. He never asked where I was going when I said I had plans, never questioned why I was dressing up more often, never even seemed to notice when I got my hair done or bought new clothes. It was like living with someone who was physically present but completely absent in every way that actually mattered. Around the same time, I reconnected with David, this guy I'd known in college who had moved back to town after his divorce. We started hanging out as friends at first, at least that's how it began. David understood what it felt like to be in a relationship where you felt unappreciated and taken for granted because his ex-wife had apparently treated him the same way Griffin was treating me, like he was just there to provide stability while she did whatever she wanted without considering his feelings. David was also older than me, probably 15 years, and had this whole wounded but wise thing going that I found really attractive. He'd actually been through therapy after his divorce and could talk about emotions and relationships in ways that Griffin never could or would. With Griffin, any attempt at discussing our problems got shut down immediately, with him saying I was overthinking everything or being too sensitive about normal relationship stuff. David actually wanted to understand how I was feeling and validate my experiences instead of dismissing them. He made me feel heard in a way I hadn't felt in years. These three men were giving me different things that I wasn't getting at home. Marcus provided intellectual stimulation and professional respect. Trevor offered excitement and worldliness, and David gave me emotional connection and understanding. Meanwhile, Griffin was giving me nothing except financial security and the legal status of being married. I started to think about how unfair it was that I was supposed to get all my needs met by one person who clearly wasn't interested in meeting any of them, while he got to just coast along getting all the benefits of having a wife without putting in any effort at all. Managing relationships with three different men while being married turned out to be way easier than I expected, mainly because Griffin was so completely checked out of my life that he wouldn't have noticed if I'd moved out for a week. I had Marcus for work trips and professional events, Trevor for weekend afternoons when Griffin thought I was running errands or meeting girlfriends, and David for evening coffee dates or lunch meetings when Griffin was busy with his own stuff. The hardest part wasn't the scheduling or keeping stories straight. It was coming home to Griffin after spending time with men who actually made an effort to be with me. The contrast was painful and honestly made me kind of angry. I'd come back from an amazing dinner with Trevor, feeling beautiful and interesting and alive, only to walk into a house where Griffin was sprawled on the couch in his same old clothes, barely looking up to acknowledge I was home. Or I'd return from an incredible conversation with David where we talked about our hopes and dreams and fears, real deep stuff, and Griffin would ask me nothing about my evening except maybe, "Can you grab me a beer while you're up?" It made me realize how much I'd been accepting scraps in my marriage while convincing myself it was normal or that all marriages were like this after a few years. These other men showed me what it felt like to be pursued, appreciated, and prioritized by someone. They planned actual dates, remembered things I told them, asked about my feelings, and made me feel like spending time with me was the highlight of their day rather than some obligation they had to fulfill. Griffin hadn't planned a real date in over 2 years, couldn't remember the last book I'd read or show I'd mentioned wanting to see, and treated our conversations like interruptions to whatever he was doing on his phone. The intimate aspects with each of these men were incredible too, not just physically but emotionally. They were present, engaged, focused on making sure I was happy and satisfied. It was such a contrast to the routine, obligatory encounters I'd been having with Griffin, where I felt more like he was just going through the motions to keep me from complaining about that part of our relationship too. With Marcus, Trevor, and David, I felt desired and beautiful and worth the effort. They made me remember what it was like to feel genuinely wanted by someone instead of just tolerated. I started taking better care of myself too, working out more, buying nicer clothes, getting regular hair appointments. Griffin never noticed these changes, which just confirmed for me that he wasn't paying attention to anything about me or my life. But these other men definitely noticed and appreciated the effort I was putting in. It felt amazing to dress up for someone who would actually comment on how I looked instead of just walking past me like I was furniture that happened to be in his house. The crazy part was how normal it all started to feel after a while. I had my work life where Marcus and I would text throughout the day and meet up whenever possible. I had my social life where Trevor would take me to nice restaurants and cultural events that Griffin would never want to attend because they required effort and engagement. I had my emotional support system with David, who I could talk to about anything without being dismissed or told I was being dramatic. And then I had my home life with Griffin, which honestly felt like the least important part of my world. He was just the person I happened to live with and share bills with, not someone who added any value or joy to my daily experience. I wasn't even feeling guilty anymore, because what exactly was I betraying? A man who acted like I didn't exist most of the time? A marriage where I was the only one putting in any effort to maintain any kind of connection? Griffin had essentially abandoned our relationship emotionally and physically long before I started seeing other people. I was just finally doing something about the situation instead of sitting around waiting for him to remember he had a wife who needed attention and affection from him. Everything fell apart on a random Tuesday night when Griffin picked up my phone to check the time because his was charging in the bedroom. I'd gotten careless with my messages, probably because I'd been living this double life for almost a year without any problems or close calls. Griffin never looked at my phone, never questioned my schedule, never seemed suspicious about anything I was doing. I'd gotten comfortable thinking he was too checked out to notice or care about what I was doing with my time. But that night, a text from Trevor popped up right as Griffin was holding my phone, and it was definitely not something you could explain away as just friendly. Something about how much he'd enjoyed our afternoon together and how he couldn't wait to see me again soon. Griffin stared at the message for what felt like forever, then started scrolling up through our conversation history. I watched his expression change as he read through weeks of flirty texts, plans to meet up, and pretty obvious references to our physical relationship. Then he went into my other messages and found similar conversations with Marcus and David. I could see him trying to process what he was reading, like he couldn't believe what was right there in front of him on my phone. When he finally looked at me, I could tell he was completely shocked. Like it had genuinely never occurred to him that I might be getting attention from other men while he was ignoring me at home every single day. He started asking all these questions. How long had this been going on? Who were these men? Had I been sleeping with all of them? His voice was shaky, and he looked genuinely hurt, which honestly surprised me. I mean, what did he expect? You can't treat your wife like she's invisible for years and then act devastated when she finds people who actually want to spend time with her and make her feel valued. I tried to explain that I had never meant for it to happen like this, that I had been lonely and feeling completely disconnected from him for so long. I told him about all the times I'd tried to talk to him about our problems and how he dismissed my concerns or made me feel like I was asking for too much just by wanting basic attention from my own husband. I reminded him of all the nights he'd chosen his phone or TV over having a conversation with me, all the times he'd forgotten important things about my life, all the ways he'd made me feel like I didn't matter to him at all. But instead of understanding where I was coming from or acknowledging his role in what had happened, he just kept focusing on the cheating part. He couldn't seem to grasp that this wasn't something that happened out of nowhere. It was the result of months and months of being neglected and taken for granted in my own marriage. I wasn't some terrible person who just decided to hurt him for fun. I was a woman who had tried everything to get her husband's attention and connection, and had finally given up and found it elsewhere when it became clear he wasn't interested in providing it. The argument went on for hours, with him acting like he was this innocent victim and me trying to make him understand his part in what had led to this situation. He kept saying things like, "I can't believe he did this to us, and how could you throw away our marriage?" But where was that concern for our marriage when I was literally begging him to spend time with me? Where was that investment in our relationship when I was trying to get him to engage with me about anything deeper than logistics and household management? I finally told him the truth, that I don't think he wanted to hear, that I had been mentally loyal to him the entire time this was happening. My heart and my commitment to our marriage had never wavered, even when I was with other men. Physically, I might have been unfaithful, but emotionally and mentally, I was still his wife, still trying to make our relationship work and hoping he would eventually step up. These other relationships were just filling the gaps that he had left empty through his neglect and indifference. I never stopped wanting him to be the husband I needed. I just stopped waiting around for it to happen while getting nothing in return. Griffin couldn't wrap his head around the concept of mental loyalty, which honestly just proved how little he understood about relationships and emotional connection in the first place. He kept saying it was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard, that cheating was cheating regardless of what was going on in my head or heart. But he was missing the point completely. I never stopped loving him, or wanting our marriage to work. Everything I did was because I was trying to get my needs met so I could be a better wife to him, not because I wanted to leave him or destroy what we had built together. If he had been paying attention to me, if he had been making even basic effort to connect with me, none of this would have happened in the first place. The weeks after our confrontation were honestly exhausting. Griffin went through this whole phase where suddenly he wanted to talk about everything, wanted to spend time together, wanted to work on our relationship. But it felt fake and desperate, like he was only interested in fixing things now that he realized other men found me attractive and desirable enough to pursue. Where was this energy when I was literally begging him for attention? Why did it take me finding validation elsewhere for him to remember that he had a wife with needs and feelings? His sudden interest in our marriage felt more like jealousy and possessiveness than genuine love or concern for my happiness and our connection. He started asking me to quit my job, so I wouldn't see Marcus anymore, wanted me to block Trevor and David on everything, basically wanted to control my entire social life to make sure I couldn't stray again. But he wasn't addressing any of the underlying issues that had led to this situation in the first place. He wasn't talking about how to be more emotionally available or how to make me feel prioritized and valued in our relationship. He was just focused on keeping me away from other men, like that would somehow fix the emptiness and loneliness I'd been feeling in our marriage for years. I tried to explain that I needed him to understand why this had happened, not just prevent it from happening again through monitoring and control. I needed him to acknowledge his role in our marital problems and commit to actually changing his behavior and approach, not just promise to watch me more closely. But every conversation turned into him being the victim and me being the terrible person who had betrayed him and destroyed our perfect marriage. He couldn't see past his hurt feelings to understand that I had been hurting, too, for much longer than he had. Eventually, I realized that we were never going to get past this because Griffin was never going to take responsibility for his part in destroying our connection and intimacy over the years. He wanted me to apologize and grovel and promise never to stray again, but he didn't want to examine how his neglect and indifference had created the situation in the first place. So when he said he wanted a divorce, I didn't fight it. Honestly, I was relieved in a lot of ways. I was tired of being married to someone who only valued me when he thought he might lose me to someone else. I was tired of having to explain why I deserved basic attention and affection from my own husband. I was tired of being the only one working to maintain our relationship and connection while he coasted along taking everything I did for granted. Now I'm single and dating, and it's honestly amazing compared to what I was dealing with before. I can see whoever I want without having to sneak around or feel guilty about getting my needs met by people who actually appreciate my company. I don't have to come home to someone who makes me feel invisible or unimportant or like spending time with me is some kind of burden. The men I'm seeing now appreciate me and make an effort to be with me, which is exactly what I deserve and should have been getting all along. Griffin has tried reaching out a few times, probably realizing what he lost now that it's too late. But I'm done settling for someone who only cares about me when it's convenient for them or when they're afraid of losing me. I learned that I'm worth more than being someone's afterthought or backup plan. I deserve to be with people who are excited to spend time with me, who remember things I tell them, who make me feel valued and appreciated. Griffin had years to figure that out and chose not to, so now he gets to deal with the consequences of taking me for granted for so long.